It's just about 4 o'clock, so I want to thank everyone for joining us today. My name is Adam Hirsch, and today me and AJ Singh and I will be presenting today's webinar on the CARES Act, providing fast and simple forgivable loans to help your business cope with COVID-19. We're both partners with Hunter Business Law, the entrepreneur's law firm. Our goal is to help growth-focused entrepreneurs help grow, start, and sell their businesses. We understand that COVID-19 has had a dramatic slowdown in businesses, and there are programs available to help with that and get your business money fast so that this slowdown doesn't become something more. So what we're going to talk about today are ways to help get your business money it needs quickly and some of the programs that are available for you. We have the ability to ask questions through the webinar, and at the end, I'll be monitoring some of the questions which we've gotten, and we'll try to answer some of those, as long as some of them that have been emailed to us. We understand that this is not necessarily the sexiest topic or a little bit boring, and we'll try to make it in a manner which is fun and at least as easy to understand as possible. And I want to give a chance for AJ to introduce himself as well.
Thanks, Adam. So as Adam mentioned, my name's AJ Singh, and I, along with Adam, am excited to do our best to provide you the information we've been able to gather thus far on the loan programs that are being offered by the federal government through the SBA. Please keep in mind, most of our presentation is focused on the Paycheck Protection Program, but there are other loan programs available. And, as a business owner, I'd highly recommend that obviously those who have joined clearly are already displaying an interest in looking at these, because as Adam mentioned, this could be the lifeline that your business needs to get through this truly unprecedented time that we are all facing together, and of course all of you are facing as business owners. So, we hope that find this webinar to be informational and beneficial, and then please keep in mind we're available to you as a resource to help you as you move forward.
All right. So with anything, we have to do our best to disclaim things because we're lawyers and part of it's what we do. But the reality is that today we're going to talk about the CARES Act, Keeping American Workers Paid Act, and the Paycheck Protection Program. While we're going to do our best to give you the most accurate and up-to-date information is rapidly changing and may change up until the time when you apply for your loan. In fact, I got a call today as we were preparing for this webinar about 10 minutes ago, that the SBA changed the term and changed the form earlier this afternoon. So when we mean things are up to the minute, things are really up to the minute. A lot of these factors are really going to be influenced by who your lender is and the lender that you have. And your particular lender may dictate requirements separate or different than what we discuss here today. Keep in mind, every business is different. Simply because we propose one suggestion, that doesn't mean that's going to work well for you. And there may be additional factors in your business that make one solution better or worse. So we really recommend that you speak with your lawyer and you obtain legal advice as well as advice financially as to which is the best for your business.
And to piggyback on Adam, your CPA more than likely will be also a very valuable resource to you in this process. They may be able to quickly access the documentation that your lender will receive. While we're going to try in this presentation to give you the details that we are aware of, as Adam mentioned, things are literally changing by the minute. Beyond the items Adam just mentioned, which came up today, we've already seen multiple changes throughout this week, as well as a truly interesting where certain lenders are asking for some documentation, other lenders are not, the process by which lenders are handling this. It's really all over the place, folks. And, with that said, and as we'll talk about through this presentation, the best thing you can do is do the best you can to get the, do your homework. Part of this will be the webinar and the information we'll provide you, but then most importantly is to work with your lender to satisfy their requirements, because ultimately that's who matters. That's who's going to be getting you the loan.
Now, the last other thing before we go on to the next step are, for the Paycheck Protection Program loans, the SBA is not giving those directly. You have to get those through an SBA approved lender. So that's when we talk so much as lender specific. You can't go to you can, for certain loans, you can go to SBA.gov and apply, but for the loans which we're talking about here today, you must go through a lender. Now, something else that we've done to try to highlight areas that have changed. As you see the blue 1% on your screen, what we've tried to do is for areas that we know that have changed over time, we've tried to highlight that in blue so that you can see specifically how much things are changing by the minute. So to just give a basic understanding of what we're talking about, the CARES Act is the name of the global bill which was recently passed into Congress. What the CARES Act did through the Keeping American Workers Paid and Employed Act was provide approximately $350 billion, that's billion with a B, of funding for small businesses to receive up to 2.5 times a business's monthly payroll, or $10 million, in the form of a loan that can be completely forgiven. Whatever money is not forgiven becomes a loan at 1% interest to be paid back over 2 years with no prepayment penalty or personal guarantee required. The purpose of the CARES Act and the Paycheck Protection Program was designed to make money available to small businesses in a simple and fast manner so that businesses could keep their workers paid and employed as a result of COVID-19.
And as Adam mentioned, just even on the idea of the 1%, that was in the initial guidance that came out. It was mentioned that it was going to be 0.5%. But with that said, 1%, even for the money that is not, you're not able to have forgiven, is an excellent interest rate in my opinion. And as we'll go through this presentation, we'll mention some other things, but it's truly a unique program as far as in the different programs I've seen, wherein you can literally have the entire loan, assuming you follow the items that we'll mention, literally have the entire loan forgiven for your business.
What we're going to do is go through an outline as to how we're going to go through this process and go through what we're going to talk about today and in terms of the next steps. So the first thing we're going to talk through is the amount of the loan and how much money you're able to get. The next thing is we're going to use there's a few key terms, how everything is measured in this loan process. So we're going to talk through what those terms mean and how they're defined and calculated. Then we're going to talk about eligibility requirements. Next, we're going to go through what you're able to use the loan amounts for. Fourth and fifth go together in terms of loan forgiveness. Now, the name of this program and the name of the act is the Keeping American Workers Paid and Employed Act. And I'm going to say that word a lot today because it really puts things into perspective. The purpose of these loans are to keep American workers paid and employed. So if you were to do something, if you as a business were to do something that would reduce your workforce and not keep your workers paid and employed, there's going to be impacts in that in terms of what abilities you have to have the loan forgiven. We're also going to talk about the repayment terms, and lastly, we're going to talk about how to apply for the loan and some of the questions that we're seeing lenders ask thus far. So first thing we're going to talk about is the loan amount. The legislation says that the loan amount is based off the average total monthly payments by the applicant for payroll costs incurred during the 1-year period before the date on which the loan is made, multiplied by 2.5%. So in simple terms, what that means is your average monthly payroll divided by 12 or your annual payroll divided by 12 times 2.5%. Now, we highlight this next thing in blue because there's a big difference between what the legislation says and what the loan application is saying. And for certain businesses, that could have a big impact. The loan application is saying, use your 2019 average monthly payroll. Well, if your business had a big fluctuation between 2020 quarter one and 2019 quarter one, this could dramatically impact the loan which you're getting. If it doesn't, then it might not make that big of a deal at all, but for others, it really could. If your business has a big fluctuation in that area, that's certainly something you want to talk about with your lender to see which number they want you to use. So ultimately, what you're going to do is you're going to take your average monthly payroll, times it by 2.5%. That is the amount of your loan. However, that amount cannot exceed $10 million. Now, for seasonal employers, that measurement period is going to be February 15th, 2019 through June 30th, 2019. So for an example, a Halloween store or a Christmas store likely is not going to be eligible because they're not open during this window. But an Easter store or potentially some early summer businesses may be eligible because they have payroll during these periods.
And, you know, to piggyback on what Adam's saying, number one, as far as the seasonal employers, obviously trying to calculate an average based on an entire year would not be very fair for such seasonal employers. But for most people who are non-seasonal employers, you're just trying to figure out what that average monthly payroll costs are. We'll go through here in a little bit the definition of payroll costs under the Act and things of that nature, and really help you understand what goes into that. But with that said, you're trying to take the monthly average, so you're dividing by 12, and as Adam mentioned, you're going to look, the application says 2019 average monthly payroll, but the bill itself, as well as guidance that has come out from Treasury, states it's the 1 year period before the date is on which the loan is made. So as Adam mentioned, most importantly, it's what your lender says. That's what I would follow if I were you. And one thing to just clarify that Adam was saying, which was he mentioned that it's 2.5%. It's actually just 2.5 times that. So what you're trying to do is your average monthly payroll amount, and then you're going to do 2.5 times that amount to determine the loan amount you'd be eligible for. Basically, they're trying to cover 10 weeks type of payroll for companies through this loan.
So we're now going to talk through the loan terms. We're going to go through next about how payroll is calculated because that's going to be a big thing, but I want to also talk through, or in a few minutes, about how payroll is calculated, but I want to also talk through the loan terms. So the amount of the loan, anything which is not forgiven, is going to be at 2 year as a 2-year term at 1% interest. The legislation authorizes interest rates up to 4% annually with up to a 10-year term. Initially, the Treasury Department indicated interest rates would only be at 0.5% with a 2-year term. But late last night, they changed this to interest rates at 1% at a 2-year term. As of this moment today, April 3rd, that's what we are being told the rates are. That could change. They changed yesterday. They could very easily change again. So it's really important that you talk with your lender as soon as you can to figure out what your rates are going to be. But what is clear is there are to be no prepayment penalties, and loan payments will be deferred for 6 months. There's no personal guarantee requirements. The loan is fully unsecured and there are no collateral requirements. Neither the government nor any lender can charge any loan fees as a result of these. And the other thing to keep in mind is if you apply for the Paycheck Protection Program loan, your business may be ineligible for other loans, programs, or other credits that are available. While we said it throughout, we're today talking about the Paycheck Protection Program loan. But there are other loans available. There are grants available, there are credits available, and other programs available to help your business as a result of COVID-19. I would certainly talk with your vendor to see what programs they also have available separate and apart from the Paycheck Protection Program. In addition, depending on the type of business you have, you may also want to check out SBA.gov to see the programs available there. In addition, certain state organizations are offering programs and loans additionally from these. The reason we bring that up are some programs are mutually exclusive, that if you take monies under that loan, you may be barring yourself from loans under the Paycheck Protection Program. And there's also the possibility that you may, by taking a Paycheck Protection Program loan, bar yourself from the ability to get other loans as well.
Thus far, my understanding has been that, and again, like everything, and unfortunately, we have to caveat many things, but I think it's important for you all to be aware. Thus far, it's our understanding that the economic injury disaster loans, you could do that, as well as the paycheck protection loans, but the use of the proceeds would be different. Also, thus far, it's my understanding that there are certain tax credits that the government is offering, the IRS is offering from a payroll tax perspective, but thus far, my understanding is you would not be able to take those payroll tax credit benefits if you're applying for the PPP loan. But again, and apologize for the moving target on some of this stuff. Once there's clarity, we'll be happy to share it with everybody that's on this webinar via email. But thus far, that's what we do know. And as Adam mentioned, you just got to be careful here to make sure you don't, by taking one loan, unfortunately, can't avail yourself of something else that might be significantly beneficial for your business.
Okay, so there's a few words that we're going to talk about throughout here, and I want to clarify everything so everybody knows. First thing we're going to talk about is loan eligibility. Businesses between 1 through 500 employees are eligible for the Paycheck Protection Program loans. Independent contractors and sole proprietorships are also eligible for these loans. Most industries are eligible. If your industry is illegal under state, federal, or local law, you are not eligible. So a marijuana type business, because it's illegal under federal law, and certain gambling businesses are not eligible for these programs. Typically, only businesses of 500 employees or smaller are eligible. However, if you're an employer with more than 500 employees, you may be eligible if you meet the small business size standards for your specific industries. Some examples of these are larger restaurant groups that may fall within this group. But just because you're over 500 employees, it's not an automatic bar. You should check SBA.gov to see if you meet those standards. So when can you apply? Today is the first day of where the loan application and loan funds became available. And we're going to talk about later some of the things we've heard today about some of the processes. But starting today, these applications are available and for funding. And you're able to start getting loans if you're a small business or sole proprietorship. You can apply today and receive loans to cover payroll and certain expenses through their SBA lender. Starting April 10th, independent contractors and self-employed individuals can apply. And as we said, your eligibility may be impacted if your business has already participated in other COVID-19 disaster programs. Something that I've seen come up and I want to address, and I've seen in some of the questions, are what happens if they run out of money? What the Treasury Secretary has said is that if the $349 billion that have been appointed runs out, they are going to go to Congress to ask for more money. I can't put any guarantees on that process, but that is what the guidance that the Treasury Department has said will happen if they run out of money. The next thing we're going to talk about is the covered period. You're going to hear us use that term a lot. Covered period means February 15th, 2020 through January 30th, 2020.
I think June 30th, 2020.
June 30th, 2020. I apologize for that.
So what they're trying to do with the covered period is use that, and as you'll see, it's going to come up in some of the definitions as your measurement period for various things that you need to document as related to particularly the loan forgiveness portion of this. But the next thing we want to talk about now is one of the most critical definitions when it comes to determining the amount of loan you may be eligible to apply for under the PPP program. So let's kind of divide this into what's included and not included with, I will, when I get to the 1099 area or independent contractor area, I'll mention while it's included in right now on the column of includes, that's a huge gray area. And I'll talk about it in more detail in a second. But let's start with the stuff that's not in the gray area and that is included in payroll costs. So that would be the salary, wage, commission, cash, tips, or similar compensation or their equivalent that you pay to any of your employees, any vacation, parental, family, /medical, /sick leave pay you pay to your employees. There is an exception as related to the expanded benefits you have to pay under the expanded FMLA Act, which passed related to COVID-19. But generally speaking, family, medical, and sick leave is eligible to be included. You're going to also include any payments made for dismissals or separations. You're also going to include your any healthcare premiums. So this is a big one because a lot of businesses do pay premiums or at least a portion of the healthcare premiums for their employees. That's something that can be included in payroll costs. Any retirement benefits that you're paying for any employees, that would be includable, as well as any state or local employment taxes which an employer pays. That would also be in the included category. Now, speaking of independent contractors, as Adam mentioned on a prior slide, independent contractors and sole proprietorships can separately apply for their own loans. We've seen a lot of different things on this. Frankly speaking, the bill itself, us as lawyers, we always look to the legislation first. And when that bill was released earlier this week, we looked at it and it included 1099 independent contractors. However, in the most recent Treasury guidance that we have seen that 1099 independent contractors are not included. In addition, we've seen at least a handful of lenders who are taking the same position. This is going to be one that really I would talk to your lender about. If they are going to include it, allow for it to be included, obviously go ahead and include it. If they won't, there's not much you can do to fight them. And frankly speaking, as we sit here right now, today, I think it's potentially not going to be includable for various reasons. So again, talk to your lender about that, but it's been an area that we've been fielding a lot of questions this week in general. Can you include payments to 1099 contractors? And as of now, I would say, no, you can't. But again, your lender will be the final decision maker on that item. Now, when you're looking at the things that you cannot include, well, one of the biggest things that you cannot include is any salary which you pay to people which is in excess of $100,000. When we go through the example on the next slide, I'll crystallize this with a little more clarity for you. But essentially, any salary you've paid to them, so if you have an employee and they're making $150,000, you can only count up to $100,000 for that person. In addition, you cannot include any taxes imposed by chapters 21, 22, and 24 of the Internal Revenue Code. That's going to be your employer-related taxes and things and federal withholding items. You can't include any compensation of an employee whose principal place of residence is outside of the United States. You also cannot include qualified sick leave wages and qualified family leave wages, okay, for which there is a credit allowed. So they're not allowing you to do double counting here. And again, you would want to look at those wages if you end up having to pay them and talk with your CPA in particular, whether you're looking to get a credit, because you won't be able to include it here. And then again, as I mentioned earlier, there might be some further restrictions related to the PPP loan and the ability to take some of these credits.
I want to bring up a question that somebody had asked of, can bonuses count? Bonuses to an employee do count towards payroll costs, but keep in mind, everything is subject to the $100,000 limitation we're going to show an example of before. So, for example, if there was an employee with a $50,000 salary and $20,000 of bonuses, you could add the bonuses towards the payroll compensation. However, if the salary was, let's say, $150,000 and they had an additional $30,000 of bonuses, you're capped at the 100 anyway. And if the bonuses number in the situation of they made $90,000 and they got $20,000 in bonuses, that would put them at 110, you'd be still capped at the $100,000.
So let's go through this example. So if you were paying an employee over $100,000, okay, when you're calculating, as I just mentioned, it's capped at that $100,000 limit. So you're going to calculate for that person on a per month basis, you're paying them basically in gross pay $8,333.33. Okay. If you were to do it on more of an annual basis and then just divide by 12, again, you would just include up to $100,000. So let's go through like two hypotheticals here, which will further illustrate how this works. So let's say for your business, your payroll costs were $6 million for the relevant measurement period. And obviously, if you divide 6 million by 12, your average monthly payroll costs for that period would be $500,000. As we mentioned earlier in this webinar, you're going to take that average monthly payroll cost and you're going to multiply it by 2.5, 2.5 times that amount. So for $500,000, that means the total loan amount you would be eligible to apply for is $1.25 million. Let's look at the cap, though, of 10 million. So obviously, I don't know how many businesses have a $60 million monthly payroll, yearly payroll, but there might be those. And let's say your average monthly payroll cost, then when you divide that by 12, it's $5 million. Now you're going to have to multiply that 5 million by 2.5. So now you're at $12.5 million, but you can't apply for a loan for $12.5 million. You can only apply for a loan for $10 million because that's the upper limit of the cap, or basically the maximum amount under any circumstance that you could apply for a loan under the PPP program.
So there's one additional thing which I want to bring up in terms of the $100,000 cap. It talks of the $100,000 cap is per employee. But if you have health benefits, for example, if you offer health care to your employees and you're paying, or you as the employer are paying a portion of the employee's health benefits, that is in addition to the $833 per month. And so it's not that some employees that are under 100 get their health benefit numbers added. All of your employees, if you have a group health plan, if you have retirement plans, or in state and local taxes, which you may pay on a particular employee, those go on top of the $8,333.33 per month you're eligible for the employee.
Adam, that's an excellent point. I'm glad you mentioned that because people can get tripped up on that. But the fact is the $100,000 cap is only applying to salary. Healthcare benefits and those other benefits that Adam mentioned that we had on our list on the previous slide, those can be added on top of the 100,000 salary that you're including. Now, when you're looking at what these loan proceeds can be used for, obviously the federal government is wanting these funds to be used for specific things. When we get into the loan forgiveness portion, we'll talk about some of the specific requirements, what the government will look at for measuring what you've used those items. But let's just go through the list of items that you can use these loan proceeds for. So you can use it obviously to make payroll costs. You can have costs related to the continuation of group healthcare benefits. You can have it for employee salaries, commissions, or other compensations. You can do it for payments of interest on any mortgage obligation. Please keep in mind, though, you cannot use these funds to pay down principal on your mortgage related to real estate that your business may own, only for payments of interest. In addition, you can use these loan proceeds for paying rent. I think that's going to be a major use for a lot of people under this program. And so just to be clear on that, you can use it to pay rent. You can use it to also pay your utilities for your business. In addition, interest on any other debt obligations that were incurred before the cover period, you can use the loan proceeds for that as well.
So I do want to clarify one thing that we got a question about this that somebody had just brought up that said the bank that they had worked with was not letting them apply benefits in excess of the 8,333 threshold. The legislation, the way it reads, says you can. But as we had talked about throughout, sometimes there's what the lenders are doing and what the legislation gives the rights to are not necessarily the same thing. So a lot of what we're saying here really may be impacted by what your lender decides. And we're going to talk a little bit towards the end about various lenders and things that we're saying. But I do, and I appreciate someone for messaging that to us. But there's certainly things that today's day one. There's a lot of things going out there and a lot of things that may change over the next few weeks and days.
And to Adam's point, lenders are interpreting things on, in whatever form or fashion they feel comfortable that they can do based on the guidance they've received. They're taking positions on things that they feel comfortable, and those are not consistent whatsoever. So it's absolutely could be the case that one lender is saying, yep, healthcare benefits, that's subject to that $100,000 cap. And another lender is saying, no, it's not. And to Adam's point, the bill does say that you could include it, but it's going to be really up to the lender.
So the thing that we talked about here is the question that a lot of people are asking about loan forgiveness and what can be forgiven. We just talked about, and we're going to try to make these slides available for everyone so they can see them as well and have them after this, that the uses of how loan proceeds can be used. However, the usage and what can be forgiven don't necessarily match up. That an eligible recipient shall be eligible for forgiveness of indebtedness on any loan in the amount equal to the following costs incurred and payments made. So keep in mind, these only apply towards costs you actually incur and payments that you make. Just because you're eligible for the loan for that amount, if you don't then use the proceeds for these don't then count. They don't count towards the forgiveness. So what are the things that count towards loan forgiveness? Payroll costs, an amount on a covered mortgage obligation but that can't include payment of principal, that can't include prepayment or of a principal. Any amount on a covered rent obligation and any covered utility payment. I'm going to go back to the usage slide for a second so everyone can just keep in mind after they've seen that and now see the loan forgiveness, just to see the differences there. So for example, the group healthcare benefits, what they're saying there are, those don't necessarily count. The interest on other debt obligations, those don't necessarily count towards loan forgiveness. Now, how are these going to be treated? Any loan forgiven, according to the legislation, says it's going to be deemed canceled indebtedness. So, big thing we've talked about are the limitations. Now, so as said throughout, it's the Keeping American Workers Paid and Employed Act, which means employers that don't keep their American workers paid and employed may not be able to get their loans forgiven in the full amount. As a general rule, you're not going to be able to get your loan forgiven in an amount that's more than the loan received. There's some calculations we'll talk about a little bit later on, that if your business had tremendous growth, you could get a formula which would show that you could actually get more forgiven than you got, but they've capped that out, that you can't get more than you've gotten forgiven. Now, at least 75% of the amount forgiven must be used for payroll costs. So you can use the funds for other things, and you can use the funds for anything which was on the list of used funds. But you can only use those things for up to 25% of the total loan. 75% of the loan must be for payroll. Now, the next thing that we're talking about is the reduction in workforce. That employers that reduce their workforce or reduce their workforce's salaries and reduce workers' salaries may have the amount of the loan be forgiven in a proportional manner based on a reduction in workforce. There's also something called a rehire provision, which we're going to talk about later on, that if you rehire employees or you bring back, if you negate any reduction in salaries, you're going to be able to cancel out these restrictions.
And, Adam and I expect that, listen, I think the pencils will be sharp on both ends of this, but in particular on the loan forgiveness side of things. I think they're going to really scrutinize all these details. And I also expect that it's possible some of this guidance may change. It gets a little, frankly speaking, confusing as you go through these different items. We'll do our best to try to simplify what are the things you have to keep an eye out as a business owner so you can still qualify to have the maximum amount of your loan forgiven. But please keep in mind that this area gets a little tricky to follow.
So we got there. Okay. Now, first part we talked about a reduction in workforce. So this is the keeping American workers employed portion of this. That the amount of the loan forgiveness shall be reduced in accordance with the following formula. So I'll go back a little bit to 5th grade where we're doing fractions, where you have the numerator, the top number, and the denominator, the bottom number. So what you're going to do is, for the top number, you're going to take the average number of full-time employees per month employed during the covered period. So remember, the covered period was February 15th, 2020 through June 30th, 2020. So what you're going to do to figure out how the loan on the reduction pieces, you're going to look at the number of average full-time employees you had per month during that period. And we'll show some examples to make this make a little bit more sense in a minute. Now, this is the big election here, that you're going to divide that by the average number of full-time employees employed by the eligible recipient during one of two periods, either February 15th, 2019 through June 30th, 2019, or January 1st, 2020 and February 29th, 2020. That is at the election of the borrower. From what I have seen thus far, the lenders are not asking you at this stage which election you're going to take and which denominator you're going to pick. There may be benefits for you to use one versus the other. We'll talk about that in a minute. But you're going to basically divide your number of full-time employees you had employed this year during this covered period versus either the same period last year or in January and February 2020. So the reason I highlight this next thing in blue is to talk about that sometimes things are not defined very well in the legislature, in the act itself. And so this is the definition of average number of employees as taken from the law. The average number of full-time equivalent employees shall be determined by calculating the average number of full-time equivalent employees for each pay period falling within a month. I know that's very helpful, but what that ultimately means is how you're going to calculate this number is you're going to take the number of employees, full-time equivalent employees that you had for each pay period and add that by, and then divide the average. So for example, if there was 2 pay periods in a month and you had 100 full-time equivalent employees during pay period 1 and 80 during pay period 2, your average for the month is going to be 90. And we'll get into some of the examples to show this. So we're going to give an example using AH Enterprises. AH Enterprises had an average number of 80 workers, full-time equivalent workers, between January 1, 2020 and February 29, 2020. Last year, between 2/15/19 and 6/30/19, they had 60. The borrower, in this case AH Enterprise, can elect which number to use. If during the covered period they have 50, they have the choice. They can either take 50 divided by 80 or 50 divided by 60. You're going to choose the lower number. That's going to put you at 83.33%. What that means is that only 83.33% of the loan would be eligible for forgiveness. Now, that's subject to the rehire exemption we're going to talk about later on, but imagining you got $1 million loan and you kept 50 out of 60 employees, you would only be able to have $800,333.33 forgiven of this.
So as Adam mentioned, there's two parts to this. And again, we're going to go through the rehire exception in a second, because if you qualify for that, you can ignore the reduction in workforce calculation. You don't have to worry about fractions. You don't have to, worry about those things. And now we're going to talk about the other piece of it, which is a reduction in salaries. But again, if you qualify for the rehire exception, this won't be applicable. With that said, let's talk about reduction in salaries. So the amount of loan forgiveness, essentially this is the language from the bill, shall be reduced by the amount of any reduction in total salary and wages of any eligible employee that is in excess of 25% of the total salary or wages of that employee during the most recent full quarter in which the employee was employed before the covered period. Well, that's quite a mouthful. Let's break that down here for a second. First is what I mentioned about eligible employee. You only include in determining salary reductions employees who during any individual single pay period during 2019, their wages or salary was not in an amount that is greater than $100,000. So essentially, let's try to keep that somewhat simple, even though, and just think about it as, again, the $100,000 salary as your mark. You're only going to count employees whose salary was reduced who make $100,000 or less. So that's the first part to think through. But let's go through, there's kind of a three-step process here that you're going to want to follow for calculating this once you've determined which eligible employees you need to include in the calculation. So first you're going to do in step one, you're going to determine the total salary reduction for each eligible employee, okay, during the period starting on February 15th, 2020 and ending on June 30th, 2020, your covered period, okay? So once you've determined that, you're going to go to step two. Step two, you're going to go for each eligible employee whose salary was reduced. You're going to multiply their total salary and wages that they earned during the fourth quarter of 2019. And remember, what this is saying is the most recent full quarter in which the employee was employed before the covered period. So that's why we're going back to the fourth quarter of 2019. You're going to take that number and you're going to multiply it by 25%. We're going to go through an example here which will illustrate all of this. Once you've calculated step one and step two, you're going to go to step three. And you're going to take the amount that you calculated in step one and you're going to subtract that by the amount calculated in step two. And the resulting amount, assuming it's a positive number, is going to be the amount which will reduce the amount of your loan which can be forgiven. So basically, if the whole amount of your loan could have been forgiven for everything else, but you have this salary reduction issue cropping up, you'd reduce that total amount that could have been forgiven by the amount you calculate here. Let's go through an example.
Yeah.
So let's assume that there's this business, AKS Advisors, and they only have one eligible employee who's making under $100,000, and his name is Tom. So let's say Tom's salary was reduced by $20,000 due to COVID-19 on February 25th, 2020. okay? And then if we're looking at the fourth quarter of 2019, Tom was paid $24,000 in total salary or wages. Okay, so what you're gonna do then is that's the step 2 amount, okay? So that's the amount you're multiplying by 25%. So you take the 24,000 times 25% and you get 6,000. Now, as I mentioned on the previous slide, you then subtract step 1, which is the $20,000 amount that you calculated, minus the amount you calculated in step 2, which is 6,000, leaving the resulting number to be 14,000. And that is the total amount by which the loan forgiveness amount, the amount of the loan that is eligible to be forgiven, will be reduced due to Tom's salary reduction. But as Adam and I have mentioned, there is this rehire exception, where if you qualify under this, you don't have to worry about the reduction in salaries. You don't have to worry about the reduction in workforce.
And I want to bring this up right now is what's going to happen is right now, the banks are not asking about this information. This is all part of what's going to be the second part of this during the forgiveness period, when you're trying to then come back and get whatever amount that you got forgiven later on.
All right, so let's talk about this rehire exception, since it's a pretty big item within this, okay? So it says, the first kind of highlight here is the amount of loan forgiveness will not be impacted by a reduction in workforce or a reduction in salary if both the reduction and salary are cured. And we'll talk about this in a second, but they have to be cured by, as of now, June 30th, 2020. So when you're looking at the reduction in workforce, okay, to determine the rehire exception, if you qualify under this is how you're going to do it. You're going to look at the period beginning on February 15, 2020, and ending on a date that is 30 days after the date of enactment of this act. And if there is a reduction, okay, in that time as compared to February 15, 2020, meaning the number of employees you had, full-time equivalent employees on February 15, 2020, there's been a reduction in that. But by June 30th, 2020, the eligible employer has eliminated such reduction in the number of full-time equivalent employees, then they would qualify under the rehire exception. We'll talk about the reduction in salary in a second. You have to do both here. But the key thing to remember and understand is it's not that you have to rehire the same employees you laid off. While that might be the case for many businesses, there may be some of those employees that for other reasons they're not choosing to rehire. You don't have to rehire all those same people. You just need to rehire the same number of full-time equivalent employee positions. Now, the second part, as I was just mentioning, that you have to, to qualify under the rehire exception is the reduction in salary. If you've done a reduction in salary, again, measurement period you're going to look at is February 15, 2020, going until 30 days after this act has been enacted. If there's a reduction as compared to the salary that employee was making on February 15, 2020, then you again need to cure that reduction by June 30th, 2020 to qualify under the rehire exception.
Let's give an example of that.
So under this example, we have Jessica's Jamaican Jerk Chicken Restaurant, which has 10 full-time employees on February 15th, 2020. Okay. Now on April 10th, 2020, which is within that period that we talked about, within 30 days after the enactment of the act, starting on February 15th, unfortunately, this restaurant had to lay off 5 of its full-time employees. However, on June 15th, 2020, things have improved significantly with COVID-19, and the restaurant has rebounded and is able to hire 5 full-time employees at the same salaries. So again, we got to look at that reduction amount. You got to be the same salaries. And of those 5 full-time employees that they're hiring, 4 people are rehires, so people that were previously employed by this restaurant, and 1 is a new hire. They never worked at this restaurant before. And the reason I included that in this example is that's what I was saying. You don't have to hire all 5 of the same people to qualify under this exception. You can do a mix or completely new people, as long as it's a 5-for-5 scenario, as based on this example. So assuming that they do this, This restaurant does not have to reduce its loan forgiveness amount as related to the calculations we talked about in prior slides for workforce reductions, for salary reductions, because as of June 30th, 2020, granted it was only 15 days before June 30th, that's fine, it doesn't matter. They have 10 full-time employees, which is the same number of full-time employees this restaurant had on February 15th, 2020. You were gonna say something, Adam?
Yes, this has come up a few times of, well, I don't want to have to keep, I don't want to have to keep a poor performer that's been struggling anyway, that I don't want to be penalized under this. I don't want to be penalized under this versus by having to keep somebody. And that's the point that AJ had just made is you don't have to bring back the same people. So if you reduced your workforce by a few poor performers and you brought in new people, as long as it, for number purposes, you're looking at body count. You don't have to have, well, Tom held this position previously, so Tom has to be there, Tom has to be there now. You can replace the individuals. They don't have to all be the same people. So next thing becomes, of course, how do you apply? Now, there's a few things here. How you're going to first apply is complete a Paycheck Protection Program application form. This application form, I've been told as of 2 p.m. today has changed. But applications must be submitted through SBA lenders. You cannot apply directly with the SBA. There are other programs that you can, but you have to complete a Paycheck Protection Program application form. What you're going to need for that is you're going to need your business information, your legal name, your tax ID, what your monthly payroll costs are. For the application itself, you do not need to calculate how you got them. They just need you to fill in the numbers. Your lenders are likely going to want that information, but for this, you're just going to put the number on the application. You're going to need to identify each 20% owner, and you have to identify what the money is going to be used for, i.e. payroll costs, rent, mortgage, etc. The application is then going to require you to answer a few simple questions. In addition, the business and each 20% owner must make a few simple make a few certifications as to how they're going to use the loan proceeds. I will bring this up is if your business, if there's the same 20% owner that operates multiple businesses, you may want to talk to your lender as to how to handle that situation. That is something that certain lenders may want handled in a particular way. And the reason we keep going back to ask your lender, as we've said throughout, is so much of this is lender specific. What one lender may want, another one may not, and vice versa. So again, each lender has different requirements, and I'm seeing things throughout as I'm looking and hearing feedback from different lenders and hearing from different clients of ours. Each lender is going to have different requirements as to what you need in order to apply. It is important that you confirm with your lender in order to determine what you need. And it's also likely, to make logical sense, is the information, the amount, what you're going to need is going to vary greatly based on the amount of money you're requesting. If you're requesting $8 million, it's going to be a lot different than someone requesting $10,000. So here's what we expect you may be expected to provide. Tax returns, W-2s, corporate formation documents, payroll records and information, and lender-specific documentation. Something that we've known has come up for employers that use professional employer organizations, or PEOs. We've heard about some issues that are going on between issues with the lenders and what the PEO requirements are, because there's different tax forms that may come up. If you use a PEO, I would recommend that you contact the PEO to ask them how they are addressing this situation, as well as talk with your lenders. The legislation is designed so that employers who use PEOs are not going to be penalized as a result of the legislation. So The purpose of this presentation was to talk about the CARES Act, the Keeping American Workers Paid and Employed Act, and the Paycheck Protection Program. We've tried to do our best to provide the most accurate and up-to-date information. But as we said, information is rapidly changing, and things may change from now from when you apply to your loan. In addition, each financial institution may impose additional requirements separate and apart from those discussed here. We can't make any guarantees that you're going to get the loan or that your financial institution is going to do this. What I have seen today, and I'm going to address these in the questions because I see a number of them have come through via email, is that certain lenders are only making these loans eligible to certain customers. And we'll talk through that in a minute. But from what there's nothing that we are able to do as the attorneys to be able to guarantee that you're going to get this funding. We can only recommend what we've seen in the process. Ultimately, all of that is up to the lender. What we would
sorry, Adam. Go ahead.
What we would also say is we recommend that you talk with your legal counsel and talk to your financial and CPA professionals to see if there are other programs that may be better fits for you and see that may be a better program for you.
And while Adam and I have mentioned a number of obviously disclaimers, we can't guarantee any of this, and that's the absolute truth of the matter. My hope, though, is, and I think Adam's as well, is that lenders are going to be smart about this. They're going to understand, rather than probably crossing all the T's and dotting all the I's as they would do for normal loans, that they will take the approach, what's most important at this truly unprecedented time that we all face, is that they got to get this money out. They got to get this money out to business owners like yourselves so that you can keep the lights on for your business and, make sure to keep, as Adam has mentioned consistently throughout, keep American workers employed and paid during this difficult time.
So what we want to do is go through a few of the questions that we've gotten answered, but I also have mine and AJ's contact information on the screen. Feel free to reach out to us. We're happy to answer any questions. We appreciate everybody coming today. And what we want to do is answer a few of the questions which we've gotten over email. So I know, AJ, there were some which I think you wanted to start with, and then I've got a few that I've seen pop up today.
Yeah, I will kind of take the question I received through email and kind of, morph it a little bit. But essentially the question related to, hey, I've already laid off some employees. Now I'm looking to lay off another 5 of them. Should I do that? Will it impact my ability to, get a loan? And what other relevant factors should I consider? So, again, as we've tried to talk about quite a bit in this, absolutely, it does make a difference. Again, what's important is context specific, the time period when those original group of employees were laid off, when you're laying off these other group of employees. But if you as your business are able to rehire, not those same people, but the same number of positions that you had to lay off, particularly when we're looking at full-time employee positions, then you should be okay. And understanding that this reductions is related to the amount of the loan that can be forgiven. It is not impacting your ability to get a loan here. And as we've talked about, the loan terms for if you're not able to get the entire loan forgiven, for the amounts that aren't able to be forgiven, it's pretty good terms. 2 years, 1% interest. Obviously, I don't think any of us have heard about getting loan terms like that typically. So just keep that in mind. So as to that person's question, yes, it does matter, but it's all about the time, and it's about whether or not you're able to rehire them. It'll impact the amount of the loan that can be forgiven. All right, Adam, what other questions have we gotten through email?
Some of the other ones that I've gotten asked a bunch is, well, lenders are not taking new customers. What do we do? And or about our lenders taking new customers, or my lender won't do this. And I've seen a bunch pop through the internet today about Twitter, in terms of Twitter, and just seeing some of what Bank of America is saying to certain of their customers. So here is the situation with these loans. Every bank is different as to how they are going to take care of these and what they're willing to do. Part of the guidance that came out yesterday was that the banks were concerned that banks were not making enough money off of processing these loans with the 0.5% interest rates. So in order to do that and open this up to more people, the Treasury Department raised the interest rate to 1%. The thought was that that may make banks more willing to lend. If your bank is not offering this program or not offering it to you, what we have seen certain banks do are they've said, if you're willing to bring your business over to us, we're willing to offer you these programs. That's a case-by-case situation. That's that's a bank-by-bank situation. We've seen that Wells Fargo announced today that this program is not going to be available today. They said it may be available starting Monday. They're not exactly sure when. They have released that it's not up available for processing, at least at this moment. I know JP Morgan Chase was working on what they were going to do. I've seen a number of different things pop up today. Each lender is handling it differently. What Mnuchin, the Treasury Secretary, sent out earlier today was that $1.8 billion of funding has already been issued. They say a lot of those were smaller lending institutions that were doing this. What I would do is contact any lending institution you have a relationship with and start with them. And I would start the process there.
Exactly. And I know we've been receiving a lot of questions, and we talked a little bit about this during the presentation, but we're receiving questions, I know, coming in via email and within the chat function regarding payments to 1099s. And again, independent contractors, sole proprietorships, they're going to be able to apply for their own loan. Their window opens on April 10th when they can start applying. So if you're an independent contractor, that's what your business is, and maybe you're the only employee or the only owner, you will have the ability to apply for a loan, but separate and apart from this program, which is opened on April 3rd, which is meant for businesses that are not independent contractors or sole proprietorships. Now, what about if you pay independent contractors? Well, as we talked about on the payroll cost slide, and again, I know we had it under the included column because frankly speaking, the act itself said it was included. However, what we are hearing, the latest and greatest information we're hearing from lenders, this is not necessarily all lenders, so again, it could be different, but what we've heard from multiple lenders thus far is they are not including any payments to 1099 independent contractors. Not to say there would not be a lender who would include it. So again, you're going to want to talk to your lender to determine this, and what they say ultimately is going to be what goes. I'm sorry, it's a huge area. I wish I had a black and white answer for you, but frankly speaking, this has been a moving target all week, and probably the areast of the biggest consternation that I've been hearing from business owners who are looking to apply for these loans.
Okay, I've seen a few questions about the EIDL loans, which is the economic injury and disaster loans, in connection with the PPP loans, and certain guidance which has changed over the past few days. What we recommend you do is I would talk to your lender about how they want you to do that, and if they're willing to let you get both. And if you have already gotten it, how they want you to make note of that. If you already submitted your application, I would talk to your lender and who you submitted it through or who you're submitting anything through, and ask them how you think how they want you to handle that.
We got anything else, Adam, that's floating around from a global standpoint?
I'm trying to think to make sure I've gotten most of them. I want to go through and see. If you're a new business and haven't started yet, and you don't have these records established, there's guidance as to how they want how the government wants these programs handled. But they're also, and we really didn't focus on these, there's specific economic grants that are available as part of the CARES Act that may be a better fit than loans for your business because they may be better calculations. So what I would do is look at SBA.gov if you don't have some of these records because you haven't been around long enough to base these off of, and start from there and see if they're grants that may be a better fit for you. The other thing to think through is to talk with your lender to see what they want in terms of documentation if you don't have that yet. Otherwise, I want to make sure, I think I've addressed most other questions. I want to make sure there's nothing else that I've missed.
And please feel free, as Adam mentioned, to reach out to us with any additional questions. We're going to keep trying to, get out information, at least to the group who attended this webinar as we learn more information. And again, a lot of this is a moving target, but we don't want you to be scared or by anything we have mentioned. In fact, I want to just go back to a comment I made at the outset, which is this is, like I said, I've not seen a program like this before. I think it is a really, really good opportunity for your business. Obviously, it's a very much needed program. Nobody wanted to be in the situation that we're currently in. But we are in the situation we are in, and I would highly recommend that you make all the efforts you can to avail yourself of these loans and work with a lender to get this money. You can apply for this all the way up to June 30th. I know Adam mentioned that the money may run out. Obviously, before then, 389 million, when you're looking at close to 32 million small businesses that would qualify. Yeah, it probably will go fast, but to Adam's point, Mr. Mnuchin has mentioned that, Secretary Mnuchin has mentioned that he does plan to go back to Congress to replenish this. So, like I said, while there's a lot of this is a moving target, your lender will be able to clarify things that they want and that they believe this loan program provides. Work with them and get yourself these much needed funds is my advice to you.
And we thank everybody for coming today. We'll try to put out more programs like this if we get feedback that these are things interested in. Please feel free, email us, ask us questions, and we can see how we can make this available and make these things out there. Because the hope is that this becomes a minor bump in the road towards what was otherwise a nice booming economy, and this just becomes a minor bump and not a bigger picture.
Most importantly, obviously, everybody is going through tremendously difficult times right now. We wish not only your businesses best wishes, but most importantly, to each one of you and your families, we hope you stay healthy and safe during this very difficult period.
Thanks, everybody, and have a great weekend. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Let me stop the recording. And we should be stopped.